this is something that comes up all the time. I get asked this question once, twice, 3 times a week. And the question is, what is the difference between an AVR and separates, meaning a pre-pro and amplifiers? And why would someone choose to go with an AVR or choose to go with a pre-pro and separates? So, amplifier and the processor. So, what are they and why do you choose one or the other?
Definitely the $64,000 question. As always.
And it could be $64,000 just depending on what you choose to buy.
I think it's kind of the evolution of what you're trying to do with your system. And one, obviously in a receiver, you have amplification built into it. And honestly, it's been kind of interesting as the receiver market over time has shifted. You see a lot of marketed numbers, but not really, I call them marketing watts versus engineering watts. So I think at the end of the day, whatever the silk screen says on there sometimes may not necessarily be the same apples and apples. You got a car that goes 140 miles an hour. You got another one that has 140. One's a 4-cylinder, one's an 8-cylinder. What's going to be the differences there in the horsepower? So number one, you want to make sure you're comparing apples and apples. And, our amplifiers that we use, either whether it's in the receiver or the standalone ones, we kind of coined the phrase years ago about all channels driven, because people would say, oh, our amplifier puts out 100 watts, blah, 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 blah. You go, wait, what was all that? And it was only
2 channels.
Exactly. 2 channels into 4 ohms, playing a 1K test tone. So, there's some comparisons, obviously, to be accurate. And that's why, you pick up some of the receivers these days from companies that will stay nameless or whatever, and they weigh nothing, and you kind of go, how did they get 180 watts or whatever they call in there and stuff like that. So, whatever you choose, you want to certainly make, and I'm a little disappointed some days in some of the companies that have been out there a long time, receivers, is they've got so many networks, features, and switches and stuff, which are all cool and everything, but they've kind of let the amplifier part of it slip a little bit. So having the horsepower is important. And secondly, when you have a power supply inside of a product, and if that power supply is driving the processor and the receiver, it has multiple functions to do. If that power supply is only focused on the amplification section, it's going to do a better job on the amplifier. So a standalone amplifier, and this is coming from a company that does both, a standalone amplifier inevitably is going to give you more power and more horsepower. And I'm going to have all that headroom. So a 200 watt amplifier, can fit inside of a chassis, and you can get one that's going to play down the low impedances and stuff, which is going to be tough to get a receiver to do that. So there's performance benefits of going with separates, because you can have a processor, and if you have a processor with its own power supply, you can inevitably have a quieter system inside the processor, and then you can have a standalone amplifier. Now, what kind of power do you need? Well, if it's it's a home theater in a modest sized room, 12 by 12, something like that, and you've got in-wall speakers and things like that, maybe a receiver, it's going to give you a good power level. Whatever you do is don't underpower your speakers. I think, people are always worried, I'm going to have too much power, I'm going to blow my speakers. I very rarely hear about people blowing speakers because they have too much power. They a lot of times will damage their speakers because they don't give it enough power. And then, they have an action moment. They lock onto that movie they like, and all of a sudden they want to turn it up a little bit more. And that's where headroom comes in. So do you need, like I said before, do you need a couple 100 watts? Yeah, not necessarily, but the headroom, the warmth that comes with that, the depth that comes with that, just the more musicality. But if you don't have a lot of power, you're going to have that problem. A standalone amplifier will give you that. So separates with a standalone amplifier will be able to do that. Now, if you've got speakers, as theater speakers get better and better all the time, even the in-wall systems and stuff like that, they tend to be more accurate. More accurate speakers tend to need more power, and then you get into a larger room, you're going to need more power to fill up with that larger room, particularly as you get into the lower frequencies. When people do all these room calculations, sometimes I think they forget that, the room, especially if it's an open space and it may be feeding into other smaller rooms or it's feeding into larger ceilings, you need to compensate for all that. That's a little bit more of a subwoofer discussion, but you want to be able to have that kind of power. So you're going to ultimately get a better performance from having a separates, with a processor and amplifier. And there's definitely a wow factor of having, a rack of gear sitting there.
There is that. Yeah. So one comment I'll make is one benefit that I found moving up from a integrated unit to separates was that, one, you get the flexibility of choosing the components that you want, right? So you can pick out, okay, this is the perfect processor for me. It does what I need it to do. It's got the right number of channels for me. And in the past, if you wanted a lot of channels, your only option was to go with a processor. Now you've got uh, gosh, what, 13 channel receivers now? Is there? I don't know if there's a 16 channel receiver out there that's got 16 channels of amplification in it, but I think somebody's got a 13. But if you wanted to go for a larger channel count and to go into a more sophisticated environment, you had to go with a processor. But I like being able to select, okay, here's the amplification I want. Here's the processor with the features that I want. And another thing, and I don't know if this is true to your product line or not, but in some product lines, when you go with the processor, the dedicated processor line, those become a bit more upgradable than what you see in just the straight receivers or AVRs, right? So when you have technology changes, some units, okay, you can change the HDMI board out and go from version 1.4a to 2.1 or whatever it might be. So there is some of that that's out there too. And then I've also seen some processors have longer warranties than non-processors as well. But and those are kind of just general blanket statements for the technologies. Anything else that we should add to that for folks that are trying to make this decision? I mean, there's the cost aspect, right? So separates are going to cost more, right? And sometimes it can be a lot more. But yeah, I think that covers it.
No, I think you hit on all the key points there. Yeah, I mean, I remember, the first 5.1 system I listened to, and I thought, wow, how could this get any better? And then you heard a 7.1 system, and then you heard a
I know.
7.1.2 system. So, and yeah, I'd like to think, the 16 channels we have out there, and there's obviously some processors even have more channels. You go, gosh, how many more can you have before the walls fall apart like Swiss cheese and stuff like that, from the speakers that are in them and stuff. So I think, this is kind of relative to, we're going from that, making the industry is making a slow shift from a 4K to an 8K platform. Now we need sources and displays and all the other, and content, there's
Yeah, content.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the hard part.
Exactly.
It's easy to make the equipment. There's just no content.
So there's a lot of future proofing out there, much like you buy a future proofed computer and stuff like that. I definitely, if I'm looking to invest my money, sometimes I look at amplification and speakers as those ones that are pretty much going to be the stalwarts. And there may be something that comes down the road that we're not even talking, that we don't even know about. Another surround format that Dolby or the new IMAX Enhanced or someone comes out with, that requires something a little different. So then in that case, the processor could be changed easier than taking out the receiver and things like that. Receivers typically are going to be for, maybe a smaller room, a little bit more restricted, depending on what you're doing, and the type of speakers you're doing. I mean, we've got our XR8. I mean, that's probably the biggest receiver that's out there. I mean, that's a 200 watt, 4 ohm stable, class H amplifier. Yeah, it's a monster of a receiver. And I think a lot of times people buy that, they might be thinking separates, but it depends also how much space they have in their racks and their equipment closets and stuff like that. And some people like to have, walls and walls, and some like to have kind of what I have here, just kind of a smaller environment too. So, but yeah, making sure whatever you get's got the horsepower from there. So
awesome. Very cool.
And by the way, we give a 5-year warranty on our receivers, our pre-pro.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so we fixed, it's funny, we fixed some of those products we talked about earlier, phase couple activators, C101s we made 30, 40 years ago. We get people sending those in for service every day. Or, what is this? I bought it. What do I do with it? So.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Well, thank you for that answer.